Viewer discretion is advised. This story is not suitable for children. Hi, welcome to Storyteller. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button. My name is Daniel Jacks, and this is the true story of Pedro Alonso López, the most prolific serial killer you've never heard of. Chapter 1. Vanishing Girls, Ambato, Ecuador, 1980. The highland town of Ambato is a quiet place. Tucked beneath the Andes, it's the kind of town where kids walk to school alone. Fruit vendors shout on the street corners, and time feels like it's moving just a little bit slower. But over the past year, a shadow has fallen over this town. Little girls, ages 8, 10, 12, have been disappearing. Not from dangerous alleyways or big cities, but in broad daylight, from markets, sidewalks, schoolyards. Each time, the story is the same. She was just behind me. I turned around and she was gone. No struggle, no screams, just silence, followed by a hole in the world. Parents are panicking, police are brushing it off, and in the middle of it all, someone's watching, blending in, smiling at children, and waiting for the next one to turn their back. Chapter 2. The Man Who Smiles Too Much. To most people, he looks harmless, thin, quiet, polite. He speaks softly, wears dusty clothes, and always seems to be moving from town to town, never staying too long. His name, he says, is Pedro. He doesn't cause trouble, doesn't drink. Sometimes he even helps mothers carry groceries at the market. But he watches little girls too closely. And when he smiles, it's just a little too wide. What no one knows, not the parents, the vendors, the school teachers, is that this man isn't just dangerous. He is, by body count, one of the most prolific serial killers in human history. And he's only just getting started. Chapter 3. The Desert Trap, Peru, 1978, 2 years earlier. Before he came to Ecuador, Pedro López was drifting across Peru, targeting the most vulnerable people he could find, street children, the kind that don't make headlines when they go missing, the kind with no last names, no police files, no protection. Pedro's pattern was terrifying in its efficiency. He would approach a girl around 9 or 10 years old, pretending to be her uncle or offering food. He'd lure her out of public view into fields, alleyways, deserts, wherever he could be alone. Then he'd rape and strangle her. But Pedro wasn't killing one girl at a time. He was killing multiple, sometimes a few in 1 week, other times several in 1 day. He later told investigators that his ideal hunting ground was chaotic markets, where children got separated from their mothers. In 1978, Pedro was almost caught when a group of Ayacucho tribal villagers found him trying to lure a young girl from their community. They tied him to a post, and by tribal law, they were going to bury him alive. But before they could, an American missionary stumbled across the scene and begged for his life, convincing the tribe to turn him over to the police. The tribe agreed. The police released him within hours. Chapter 4. Born into Nightmare. Pedro Alonso López was born in Colombia in 1948 into pure hell. He was one of 13 children. His father was killed before he was born, and his mother was violent, abusive, and a sex worker. By the time Pedro was 8, she caught him molesting his younger sister, so she threw him out of the house. From that day on, Pedro lived on the streets of Bogotá, a child alone, angry, and invisible. He says he was gang raped by a group of men his first night sleeping under a bridge. Something snapped. From that moment on, Pedro hated 2 things: men for what they did to him, and women for failing to protect him. His twisted logic became clear years later when he said, "I wanted to kill them before they turned evil. I wanted to keep them pure." Chapter 5. The Cold Confession. April 1980, Ambato, Ecuador. A flash flood hits the outskirts of Ambato. The rains come hard and fast, and when the waters finally recede, a farmhand walking near a dry creek bed spots something pale sticking out of the soil. He walks over and stops cold. It's a small human arm, half buried in mud. Police are called. As they begin digging, they find another arm, then a tiny skull, then a mass grave. And it's not just one child. Over the next several days, authorities unearth dozens of bodies, small, fragile skeletons, all female, most between 8 and 12 years old. Some are wrapped in bits of cloth, others are tangled in roots, shallowly buried in clusters. The horror is unimaginable. But what terrifies investigators even more is how many of these girls were never reported missing. No names, no faces, no files, just bones. At the same time, in a nearby town, a thin man is arrested for attempting to abduct a young girl from a crowded market. He was spotted holding her wrist, gently coaxing her toward a back alley before a fruit vendor intervened and called the police. The man says his name is Pedro López. He's soft-spoken, cooperative, calm. But when they put him in a holding cell with another prisoner, who's actually an undercover cop, something shifts. Pedro opens up, and what he says makes the officer go still. "I've killed over 300 girls," Pedro whispers, "mostly in Colombia, some in Peru, and many here in Ecuador." The officer thinks he's lying, exaggerating, but Pedro just smiles. "I remember all of them. I buried most myself. I can take you to them, if you want." Chapter 6. I Can Show You. At first, no one believes him. When Pedro López tells an undercover cop he's murdered over 300 girls, the officer assumes it's a bluff, some sick way of seeking attention in jail. But then Pedro says something that chills the room. "I know where they are. I remember all their faces. I buried them myself." He draws maps, sketches trails, names provinces and rivers. The Ecuadorian authorities, desperate for answers, take a risk. They put Pedro in a jeep, hands cuffed, flanked by soldiers and detectives, and drive him into the mountains. It's supposed to be a test, a scare tactic. But the moment they step out of the car, Pedro leads them straight to a grave, and then another, and another. Over the next week, Pedro guides police to 53 burial sites. In one town, he points to a dry ravine and says, "She's under that tree, red dress, blue shoes." They dig, and she's exactly where he said she'd be, wearing a red dress and blue shoes. There's no longer any doubt. They are dealing with a serial killer so methodical, so cold, and so prolific, he might have murdered more children than anyone in modern history. And yet, no one knows his name. Chapter 7. The Missing 100. Pedro López becomes known in the press as the Monster of the Andes. But even that title doesn't capture how vast this case really is, because Ecuador isn't the only country where girls went missing. Pedro admits to killing over 100 in Colombia alone, and claims to have killed at least 90 in Peru. He says he kept count by tying knots in a cord, one for every girl. When police raid a shack he once stayed in, they find a length of rope with 300 knots. But here's the nightmare. Only a fraction of those victims have ever been identified. Many were orphans, runaways, or children of indigenous communities that lived far from cities and never filed missing persons reports. Some bodies were dumped in caves, rivers, abandoned wells, and may never be found. To this day, hundreds of families in Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador still have no idea what happened to their daughters. But Pedro knows, and he remembers. Chapter 8. The Interviews. While awaiting trial, Pedro López agrees to several interviews with journalists and psychiatrists. He speaks calmly, proudly, like a man discussing his art. In one interview, he says, I like the girls from the markets. They trust strangers, especially if you smile. They're easy to take. He describes how he would charm them, lure them away, then lead them into the countryside. I would take them to the fields, tell them I had something to show them. When they got scared, I held their hands and said it would be okay. And then he would rape and strangle them. But what he says next is the worst part. I didn't like to kill them right away. I liked to spend time with them. I would sit next to them and talk like we were friends. He pauses. Some of them looked at me with love. That was special. Even the reporters interviewing him are so disturbed they can't sleep for weeks. One writes, "He didn't see them as people. He saw them as dolls, toys, something he could keep for a while and then throw away." Chapter 9. Justice. In 1981, Pedro López is convicted of 110 murders in Ecuador. The sentence? 16 years. That was the maximum penalty under Ecuadorian law at the time, even for someone who murdered over 100 children. But here's where the story turns from horrifying to unbelievable. Pedro López is released early in 1994 after serving just 14 years. The reason? Good behavior. Authorities announced that he has been deported to Colombia, where he'll be detained again. But after a brief psychiatric evaluation, Pedro is declared rehabilitated and set free. No ankle monitor, no permanent sentence, no life in prison. The man who confessed to killing over 300 little girls simply disappears. Chapter 10. The Ghost. The last confirmed sighting of Pedro López is in 1998 in Colombia, when he's arrested for a new murder, a 12-year-old girl found strangled. But without enough evidence and no national database, he is released again. After that, he vanishes. Some say he fled to Venezuela. Others claim he's living under a false name in rural Colombia. There are even reports that he was killed in a street brawl, but nothing has ever been confirmed. To this day, his exact whereabouts remain unknown, and so does his final victim count. Pedro Alonso López, the monster of the Andes, is a man who slipped through the cracks again and again, from childhood to arrest to conviction. He killed in silence. And when the world finally listened, it was too late. Because the most terrifying thing about Pedro López, he may still be out there, watching, waiting, and smiling.